I sit in the mahogany-paneled office of Wellington and Associates, the same law firm that has handled the Chen family affairs for 3 generations, watching my world crumble as Mr. Wellington's voice drones on about grandmother's last will and testament, and I can barely comprehend the words coming from his mouth, because surely there has been some mistake, some terrible clerical error, because my grandmother, Chen Mei Lin, the woman who raised me from age 7 after my parents died in that car accident, the woman who taught me calligraphy and business ethics and the importance of hard work, could never have left everything. The sprawling Victorian mansion in Pacific Heights, the chain of luxury tea shops that built our family fortune, the investment portfolio worth $23 million, even her precious jade bracelet that belonged to her own grandmother. To my cousin Diana Chen, that spoiled brat who never visited unless she needed money, who called grandmother's traditional values outdated nonsense, who brought her druggy boyfriend to family dinners and let him steal silver from the dining room. But here I am, 26 years old, wearing the black Chanel suit I bought specifically for this occasion because I thought I would be inheriting a business empire and needed to look the part, listening to Diana's theatrical gasps of surprise that fooled no one, watching her clutch her mother's hand while Aunt Linda tries to hide her triumphant smile behind a tissue, and I realize with growing horror that this was planned, orchestrated, that somehow they convinced my 84-year-old grandmother to change her will in the final months of her life when the dementia was getting worse, and she sometimes forgot my name but always remembered Diana's because Diana would show up with flowers and tears, playing the devoted granddaughter while I was working 16-hour days managing the tea shops that I thought would someday be mine. "Of course, Scarlett, dear," Mr. Wellington says in that patronizing tone lawyers use when delivering devastating news. "Your grandmother did leave you something. Her collection of antique teacups and a trust fund of $50,000 for your education, though I suppose at your age." And his voice trails off because we all know $50,000 is nothing compared to a $23 million inheritance, and Diana actually has the audacity to reach across the polished conference table and pat my hand while saying, "Don't worry, cousin, I'll make sure you always have a job at one of the tea shops." As if I hadn't been running those shops since I graduated business school. As if I hadn't increased profits by 40% over the past 3 years. I stare at her perfectly manicured hand touching mine, at the designer handbag that costs more than most people's monthly rent, at the smug satisfaction barely concealed behind her fake concerned expression. And I want to scream, want to flip this entire conference table and demand to know how she managed to steal everything that should have been mine, but instead I sit there like a well-bred young lady, just like grandmother taught me, and nod politely while my entire future burns to ashes around me. The next 3 months become a nightmare of legal consultations and private investigators, and what I discover makes my blood freeze because this wasn't just opportunistic manipulation. This was a calculated, years-long campaign that began when Aunt Linda's husband left her for his secretary, and she suddenly needed her mother's money to maintain her lifestyle. And Diana, fresh out of her third rehab stint and desperate to fund her party girl lifestyle, became the perfect accomplice in their scheme to systematically isolate me from grandmother while positioning Diana as the responsible, caring granddaughter who deserved everything. The private investigator, Mr. Kim, spreads photographs across my tiny studio apartment, the same apartment I had to move into after Diana evicted me from the family mansion with 30 days' notice, and shows me bank records proving that Aunt Linda hired a caregiver who slowly convinced grandmother that I was stealing money from the business, that I was planning to sell the tea shops to developers, that I only visited because I wanted her money, while Diana would show up with that caregiver's help to discover forged documents that made me look greedy and dishonest. "Look at this," Mr. Kim says, pointing to a fabricated email supposedly from me to a real estate developer, offering to sell the flagship tea shop for below market value. And I remember how confused grandmother looked the last time I visited, how she kept asking why I wanted to destroy everything she built, how she flinched when I tried to hold her hand. And now I understand why. They had turned my own grandmother against me using lies and forgeries and exploiting her declining mental state. The evidence is overwhelming and sickening. Receipts for the caregiver's payments from Aunt Linda's account, text messages between Diana and the caregiver discussing how to manage the old woman's emotions, even recordings of phone calls where they laugh about how easy it was to make grandmother believe I was the villain in this twisted family drama. And I sit in my cramped apartment surrounded by proof of their betrayal, crying until I have no tears left because I realize that for the last year of grandmother's life, she died thinking I was a monster who wanted to destroy her legacy. Within 6 months of Diana's inheritance, everything grandmother built over 50 years starts to crumble. Because Diana has no business sense whatsoever. She fires all the experienced managers and replaces them with her party friends. She changes the traditional tea blend recipes to appeal to younger demographics. She takes out massive loans against the properties to fund her European shopping trips. And I watch helplessly from my position as a barista at Starbucks. The only job I could find after Diana blacklisted me from every tea shop in the city. As our family legacy dies, a slow, painful death, while Diana parties her way through my inheritance. But losing the inheritance and the business is only the beginning of my suffering, because Diana and Aunt Linda aren't content with just taking everything. They want to completely destroy my reputation and any chance I might have of rebuilding. So they spread rumors through our social circle that I was stealing from grandmother, that I abused her in her final years, that I forged documents trying to claim money that was never mine. And slowly, one by one, my friends stop returning my calls, my professional contacts decline my networking requests, and even my childhood friend Marcus Wong, the boy I had a crush on since kindergarten, the one person I thought would always believe in me, starts avoiding me at social gatherings. The whispers follow me everywhere I go, at the grocery store, at the gym, at the coffee shop where I work. And I can see people pointing and murmuring about that Chen girl who tried to cheat her own grandmother. And every day becomes a fresh humiliation as I realize that Diana's campaign to destroy me has been more successful than she ever dreamed, because not only did she steal my inheritance, she stole my reputation, my friendships, my entire place in the world that I spent 26 years building. Then comes the cruelest blow of all. I discover that Marcus has been dating Diana for 3 months, and when I confront him at the autumn charity gala where I'm working as hired help to pay my rent, wearing a black uniform instead of the designer gowns I used to wear to these events, he looks at me with pity and says, "Scarlett, I know you're going through a hard time, but you need to accept that Diana is a good person who's trying to honor your grandmother's wishes, and maybe if you stopped being so bitter and jealous, you could rebuild your life." And I realize that Diana has been playing the victim so perfectly that even Marcus believes I'm the villain in this story. I stand there in the ballroom where I used to dance with San Francisco's elite, wearing a server's uniform and holding a tray of champagne that I can't afford to buy, watching Marcus slow dance with Diana while she whispers in his ear and glances at me with triumph written across her face. And I understand that this is her final victory. Not only did she take my money and my reputation, she took the man I've loved since childhood and convinced him that I'm the monster while she's the innocent victim who deserves his protection and devotion. The end comes when Aunt Linda produces a restraining order claiming I've been harassing Diana and threatening her safety, and the court documents include photos of me allegedly vandalizing Diana's car and leaving threatening notes. Except I recognize the handwriting. It's Diana's own writing disguised to look like mine, but who would believe me now that my reputation is completely destroyed? And as the bailiff serves me with papers banning me from coming within 500 feet of any family member or property, Diana whispers, "You should have just accepted your place, cousin, but you always thought you were better than everyone else." The next year passes in a blur of minimum wage jobs and studio apartments in increasingly bad neighborhoods, and I develop a persistent cough that I ignore because I can't afford health insurance. Until one morning, I collapse at the coffee shop where I work and wake up in the emergency room where a tired-looking doctor tells me I have advanced pneumonia complicated by severe malnutrition and exhaustion. And as I lie in that hospital bed with no visitors and no insurance to pay for treatment, I think about how completely Diana and Aunt Linda succeeded in destroying not just my inheritance, but my entire life. The hospital social worker, a kind woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, tries to help me apply for assistance programs. But I can see in her eyes that she doesn't expect me to recover. And when she asks if there's anyone I want to call, I realize there's literally no one left. Diana has poisoned every relationship I ever had. Every bridge I might have crossed to rebuild my life has been burned. And I'm going to die alone and forgotten while she lives in luxury on money that should have been mine, surrounded by people who believe her lies about what kind of person I really am. I die alone on a rainy Thursday in March, exactly 2 years after grandmother's will reading, and my last coherent thought is wondering if Diana even bothered to keep grandmother's jade bracelet or if she sold it to fund another shopping trip to Milan. And I close my eyes thinking about all the things I should have done differently, all the signs I should have seen, all the ways I could have protected grandmother from their manipulation, and then everything goes dark and cold and quiet, and I think this is how it ends, with Diana winning completely and me dying with nothing but regret and pain. Then I opened my eyes and realized I had been reborn. I'm sitting in the exact same chair in Wellington and Associates, wearing the exact same black Chanel suit, staring at the exact same mahogany conference table where my life was destroyed 2 years ago. But this time, when Mr. Wellington begins reading grandmother's will, I know exactly what's coming. And instead of shock and disbelief, I feel ice cold rage flowing through my veins because I remember everything, every lie, every manipulation, every moment of suffering that Diana and Aunt Linda put me through, every day of poverty and humiliation and loneliness that led to my death in that sterile hospital room. And this time, I'm going to be ready for them. I watch Diana's performance with new eyes, seeing how she times her gasps of surprise, how she squeezes fake tears from her eyes at exactly the right moments, how she exchanges meaningful glances with Aunt Linda when she thinks no one is looking. And I want to laugh at how obvious their act is now that I know the truth, now that I understand this entire will reading is theater designed to legitimize their theft of everything grandmother worked to build. Instead of sitting there like a trusting fool waiting for my inheritance to be stolen, I interrupt Mr. Wellington before he can finish the first paragraph and say, "Excuse me, but I need to examine the will and all related documents before we proceed, including verification of the witnesses and authentication of my grandmother's signature, as well as documentation of her mental state when this will was created." And I watch Diana's face go pale because she knows that the will she and Aunt Linda orchestrated won't survive proper legal scrutiny because in my previous life I was too shocked and heartbroken to think clearly, but this time I know exactly what questions to ask. Mr. Wellington sputters about irregular procedures and Diana stammers, "Scarlett, why are you being so difficult? We're all family here." But I fix her with a cold stare and say, "Family doesn't manipulate dying elders or forge documents or destroy each other's lives for money, Diana. So, let's drop the pretense and handle this like the business transaction you've turned it into." And Aunt Linda actually gasps because she's never heard me speak like this, never seen me display the steel backbone that I inherited from grandmother, along with her business acumen. "I don't understand what you're implying," Diana says, but her voice shakes, and I can see the panic in her eyes because their timeline is blown. Their careful manipulation is unraveling, and they never expected me to challenge them, never planned for the possibility that their victim might fight back with knowledge and strategy instead of tears and confusion. I stand up and announce that I'm postponing this will reading until I can have independent experts examine all the documents. And I can see the panic spreading across both their faces because they know their fraud has an expiration date. They know that forensic examination will reveal their forgeries and lies. And when Diana tries to grab my arm and hiss, "You can't do this," I look her in the eye and say, "Watch me," before walking out of that office with my head held high and my mind already planning their complete and total destruction. As I walk down Montgomery Street in the crisp San Francisco morning air, I make a mental list of everything I need to do. First, hire the best forensic document examiner in the city to prove the will is fraudulent. Second, gather evidence of Diana and Aunt Linda's manipulation campaign. Third, protect grandmother from their ongoing psychological abuse. And fourth, make sure everyone in our social circle knows exactly what kind of people they really are because this time, I won't be the naive victim who trusts family to do the right thing. This time, I'll be the predator and they'll be the prey. Within 48 hours of the failed will reading, I've retained Catherine Morrison, the most feared estate litigation attorney in California, a woman whose courtroom victories are legendary and whose fees are astronomical but worth every penny, and Dr. Susan Chen, a forensic document examiner whose testimony has overturned fraudulent wills in 17 high-profile cases. And when I explain what I suspect about grandmother's will, Catherine's eyes light up with the predatory gleam of a lawyer who smells billable hours and professional satisfaction in equal measure. Miss Chen, Catherine says, leaning back in her leather chair like a cat preparing to pounce. If what you're telling me is true, this isn't just inheritance fraud. This is elder abuse, conspiracy, and potentially racketeering, and I can promise you that when we're finished with your cousin and aunt, they'll wish they'd never heard the name Chen. And I feel a thrill of vindication because finally, someone believes me and has the power to make Diana and Aunt Linda pay for what they've done. The investigation moves faster than I ever imagined possible because this time I know exactly where to look. The forged emails are stored on Diana's laptop with metadata, proving they were created months after they were supposedly sent. The caregiver who helped with the manipulation keeps detailed notes about her client management strategies that read like a manual for elder abuse. And Aunt Linda was foolish enough to text Diana about their progress in turning the old lady against Scarlett, not realizing that deleted texts can be recovered by forensic specialists who know what they're doing. Dr. Chen examines grandmother's supposed signature on the fraudulent will under high-powered microscopes and declares it a competent but detectable forgery, showing pressure patterns inconsistent with Mrs. Chen's documented hand tremor and letter formations that deviate from her established writing habits. And she's prepared to testify that the signature was created by someone tracing over a legitimate signature rather than grandmother actually signing the document herself, and I watch her build an unshakable scientific case that will destroy Diana's claims in court. But the most damning evidence comes from medical records that Catherine subpoenas from grandmother's doctor, showing that during the week the fraudulent will was supposedly signed, grandmother was hospitalized with a severe case of pneumonia and heavily sedated with morphine for pain management, making it medically impossible for her to have understood or consented to any legal documents, let alone sign them with the steady hand required for the will's signature. And when Catherine shows me the hospital admission records, I feel such savage satisfaction that I actually smile for the first time since my rebirth. They're going to prison, Catherine tells me matter-of-factly as she organizes the evidence into neat folders. And not just for a few months. This is federal elder abuse with financial exploitation. And Diana's drug history means she'll be facing enhanced sentencing. And your aunt's involvement makes it conspiracy, which carries its own penalties. And I realize that this time justice won't just be served. It will be served with interest and penalties that will make Diana wish she'd never been born. Armed with evidence of the ongoing manipulation, I file for emergency guardianship of grandmother, claiming elder abuse and financial exploitation with enough documentation to convince even the most skeptical judge, and within 24 hours I have a temporary restraining order preventing Diana and Aunt Linda from visiting her unsupervised while the investigation proceeds, which means I can finally spend time with grandmother without their poison dripping into her ears every day, without their lies turning her against the granddaughter who actually loves her. The first time I visit grandmother after the restraining order, she looks at me with such confusion and pain that my heart breaks all over again, and she whispers, "Scarlett, dear, I've been so worried about you. Diana told me you were in trouble with drugs and stealing money, but you look perfectly healthy." And I have to bite my tongue to keep from screaming about what Diana really did to both of us, because grandmother is fragile and confused and doesn't need to know the full extent of her daughter's betrayal while she's still recovering from their psychological abuse. "Grandmother," I say gently, taking her hand and feeling how thin and frail she's become since Diana took control of her care. "I'm not in trouble, and I've never stolen anything from you or anyone else, and I love you more than anything in the world." And I see tears spring to her eyes because somewhere deep inside, she remembers the granddaughter who spent every weekend helping in the tea shops, who learned her recipes and her business philosophy, who never once asked for money or demanded anything except her time and wisdom. Over the next several weeks, I spend every evening with grandmother, bringing her favorite jasmine tea and reading her classical Chinese poetry. And slowly, gradually, I watch the suspicious fear that Diana planted in her mind fade away as she remembers the granddaughter who actually loves her, who learned her business lessons and traditional values, who never once asked for money or demanded anything except her time and wisdom. And I see her confusion clearing like fog lifting from San Francisco Bay as the truth emerges from beneath Diana's lies. The breakthrough comes when grandmother finds a hidden folder in her bedroom containing all the original legal documents, her real will that leaves everything to me, letters expressing concern about Diana's behavior and Aunt Linda's financial desperation, and most importantly, a detailed journal documenting how the caregiver and Diana would visit together to show her evidence of my supposed betrayal while pressuring her to protect the family by changing her will to someone more trustworthy and responsible. Scarlett, she says one evening as we sit in her garden drinking tea, I remember now what really happened, and I'm so sorry, so terribly sorry that I let them convince me you were someone you're not. And she cries as she tells me about the pressure, the manipulation, the way they isolated her from me while filling her head with lies. And I hold her and tell her it's not her fault, that she was a victim just like I was, and that this time we're going to make sure Diana and Aunt Linda can never hurt anyone ever again. The Spring Charity Gala at the Palace Hotel is always the social event of the season, where San Francisco's elite gather to see and be seen while raising money for various causes. And Diana has spent weeks planning to use this event to publicly establish herself as the rightful heir to the Chen family legacy, even hiring a publicity team to ensure her generous donation gets mentioned in all the society pages as proof that she's a worthy successor to grandmother's philanthropic traditions. I arrive at the gala wearing grandmother's vintage Chanel gown and her jade bracelet, which I had quietly retrieved from the mansion with the help of a court order, and Diana's face goes white when she sees me because she thought the restraining order and ongoing legal battle would keep me away from any social events. But she doesn't know that Catherine Morrison has connections throughout San Francisco society and ensured I was invited as her guest. And more importantly, she doesn't know that I'm not here to beg for forgiveness or plead my case. I'm here to destroy her completely and publicly. Diana tries to avoid me throughout the cocktail hour, but I can see her whispering frantically to Aunt Linda, both of them shooting nervous glances in my direction because they know something is wrong. They can sense that I'm not the broken, defeated woman they destroyed in my previous life. And when the master of ceremonies announces that Diana Chen will be making a special presentation on behalf of the Chen Family Foundation, I feel anticipation thrumming through my veins like electricity. Just as Diana is about to present her donation check with great fanfare, standing at the podium in a white dress that's probably supposed to make her look innocent and charitable, I approach the microphone and announce that I have an important update about the Chen Family Foundation's activities. And before Diana can stop me, I begin reading excerpts from her text messages discussing how to milk the old lady's money and make sure the little princess gets nothing. And I watch the cream of San Francisco society recoil in horror as they realize they've been celebrating a woman who abused her own grandmother for money. Ladies and gentlemen, I continue, my voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent ballroom, what you're witnessing is not generosity, but the culmination of a systematic campaign of elder abuse and fraud perpetrated by Diana Chen and Linda Chen against my grandmother Chen Mei Lin, and I have evidence that proves every word I'm saying. And I watch Diana's face cycle through shock, rage, and pure panic as her carefully constructed public image crumbles in real time in front of everyone who matters in San Francisco society. But the most devastating blow comes when I project the forensic evidence onto the large screens installed for the charity auction, showing side-by-side comparisons of grandmother's real signature and the forged one, along with medical records proving she was unconscious and sedated when the fraudulent will was supposedly signed, and Diana actually tries to claim that I'm the one who forged the evidence, which is when Marcus Wong, my childhood friend who I thought had betrayed me for Diana, steps forward and announces that he's been working undercover with the FBI's Elder Fraud Division and has recorded conversations with Diana, admitting to the forgery. The entire ballroom erupts in gasps and whispers as Diana realizes she's been completely and thoroughly trapped, that every lie she told, every manipulation she attempted, every crime she committed has been documented and witnessed, and as security escorts her from the premises while she screams about conspiracies and frame jobs, I feel a satisfaction so deep and complete that I almost can't breathe. Because this time, Diana won't recover from her public humiliation. This time, everyone will know exactly what kind of person she really is. After the gala disaster, Marcus finds me on the hotel's rooftop garden where I've escaped to process everything that just happened. And he tells me the truth, that he never believed Diana's lies about me, that he only pretended to date her because the FBI recruited him to gather evidence of her financial crimes, and that every moment of the past year has been torture because he couldn't tell me the truth without compromising the investigation that would ultimately save me from the destruction Diana had planned. Scarlett, he says, and his voice breaks with emotion. I've been in love with you since we were 8 years old, and you defended me from those bullies at summer camp. And watching Diana destroy your reputation while not being able to help you has been the hardest thing I've ever done. But I knew if we could prove her fraud, we could give you back everything she stole, and maybe you could forgive me for not being able to protect you sooner. I want to be angry with him for deceiving me, for letting me think he'd chosen Diana over me, for allowing me to believe that even my oldest friend had been turned against me by her lies. But when I see the tears in his eyes and remember all the small kindnesses he showed me, even during the worst of my humiliation, the anonymous flowers on my birthday, the coincidental encounters when I needed help, the way he always seemed to appear when Diana was being particularly cruel, I realize he was protecting me the only way he could while building the case that would save me. You have to understand, Marcus continues, taking my hands in his. The FBI approached me because they knew Diana would trust me more if she thought I believed her version of events. And every time I had to pretend to believe her lies about you, every time I had to act like I thought you were the villain, it killed me inside. But I knew it was the only way to gather enough evidence to put her away forever. I look into his eyes and see the same boy who shared his lunch with me when I forgot mine, who helped me with homework even when it made him late for soccer practice, who never once in 18 years of friendship made me feel like I was anything less than worthy of love and respect. And I realized that Diana's greatest mistake wasn't just stealing my inheritance. It was underestimating the loyalty of people who truly love me. When this is all over, Marcus says, and his voice is steady now, determined. When Diana and your aunt are in prison, and your grandmother is safe, and you have your inheritance back, I want to spend the rest of my life making up for every moment I couldn't stand by your side. Every time I had to watch you suffer while pretending I didn't care. Every day I had to wake up knowing the woman I love thought I had abandoned her. And for the first time in over a year, I feel hope blooming in my chest like jasmine flowers in spring, because finally, someone is fighting for me instead of against me. You never abandoned me, I whisper, understanding now that even when I felt most alone, Marcus was working behind the scenes to bring me justice. And when he kisses me under the San Francisco stars, I taste redemption and vindication, and the promise of a future where love triumphs over manipulation, where truth conquers lies, where good people protect each other, and evil receives exactly what it deserves. 6 months later, I'm standing in the same courthouse where Diana once served me with a restraining order, watching as she and Aunt Linda are sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. And the judge orders them to pay full restitution plus punitive damages that will ensure they never profit from their crimes. And as they're led away in handcuffs, Diana shoots me one last look of pure hatred. But I feel nothing but pity for someone who destroyed their own family for money they couldn't even keep. The prosecution presented such overwhelming evidence that Diana's lawyer advised her to plead guilty rather than face trial. But she refused, convinced that her charm and manipulation would work on a jury the way it worked on grandmother. And watching her testimony fall apart under cross-examination was almost as satisfying as seeing the verdict read aloud. Guilty on all counts, with enhanced sentencing for preying on a vulnerable elder. With my inheritance restored and grandmother's health improving under proper medical care, I've rebuilt the tea shop empire into something even more successful than before, expanding into online sales and premium subscription services while maintaining the traditional quality and family recipes that made us famous. And our flagship store now employs 3 of the managers that Diana fired, including Mrs. Patterson, who cried when I offered her the head manager position with a 40% salary increase and full benefits for her entire family. Grandmother and I spend every Sunday afternoon in her garden, drinking tea and planning new blends for the shops. And while her dementia is progressing, she has lucid moments where she tells me how proud she is of the woman I've become, and how sorry she is that she almost let Diana destroy everything we built together. And I hold her hand and tell her that surviving Diana's betrayal only made me stronger and more determined to honor our family legacy, and that everything we lost has been restored with interest. Marcus proposed to me in that same rooftop garden where he confessed the truth, presenting me with a ring that incorporates jade from grandmother's collection and promising to be my partner in business and life. And as I look at this man who risked his career and endured months of deception to help me find justice, I know that our love is built on the foundation of loyalty and truth that will last forever, unlike the shallow manipulation that Diana mistook for power. Sometimes people ask me if I regret the suffering I endured before my rebirth gave me the chance to change everything, and I tell them that pain taught me to recognize real love and loyalty, to value family bonds that can't be bought or sold, and to understand that true strength comes not from trusting everyone, but from being wise enough to distinguish between those who deserve your trust and those who would exploit it. And now, as I build my own family with Marcus and honor grandmother's memory through our business, I know that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about ensuring that good people are protected and loved, and that evil receives exactly what it deserves. Diana wrote me letters from prison for the first few months, alternating between threats and pleading, trying once more to manipulate me into helping her. But I burned every single one without reading past the first line because I learned that some people are beyond redemption, that some betrayals are so complete that forgiveness would be a betrayal of everyone they hurt, and that the greatest revenge isn't hatred. It's living well while your enemies rot in the consequences of their own choices. When I hold my newborn daughter in my arms, surrounded by Marcus and grandmother and all the people who fought for my happiness, I know that this is what victory looks like. Not the destruction of my enemies, but the building of something beautiful and lasting that they could never touch or taint or steal. Because love and loyalty and justice will always triumph over greed and manipulation and lies, and my daughter will grow up knowing that her family's legacy was built on truth and protected by people who understood that some things are worth fighting for.